My name is Claire. I'm 28 years old, and until that morning, I thought I was in control of my life. It was a Wednesday, an ordinary workday, or so I believed. I had spent weeks preparing for a high-stakes presentation. The boardroom lights glared down on me, the screen behind me displaying my carefully crafted slides. My pulse raced with nervous energy, but I told myself it was nothing I couldn't handle. Before I continue, please subscribe to show karma you're at the right side. Anyways, I clicked to the next slide and began speaking about market trends, my voice steady despite the sweat gathering at the base of my neck. Then the room seemed to sway. At first I thought it was the projector flickering, or maybe my lack of breakfast catching up to me. But then the words on the slide blurred, the faces around the table warped, and a stabbing pain shot through my skull. My hand reached instinctively for the glass of water on the table, but I never made it. The floor rushed up, my legs gave out, and the last thing I heard was someone shouting my name before darkness swallowed everything. When I came to, the world was full of beeping machines and the faint smell of antiseptic. My head ached, my mouth was dry, and I was lying in a hospital bed I didn't remember being brought to. The ceiling tiles above me swam in and out of focus. I turned my head slightly and winced as something tugged at my arm, an IV line taped to my skin. A nurse noticed I was awake and hurried over. "Easy," she said softly, pressing a button on the monitor beside me. "You fainted at work. You're in the hospital now. Try not to move too quickly." I wanted to ask 100 questions, but my voice cracked when I finally managed to whisper, "What happened?" "You collapsed during your meeting. Paramedics brought you in. You're stable now, but the doctor will explain more." Minutes later, a woman in a white coat appeared, clipboard in hand. She introduced herself as Dr. Alvarez, her tone professional but kind. "Claire, you experienced a fainting episode, and we're running tests to determine the cause. It could be exhaustion, dehydration, or something we'll need to investigate further." She adjusted the IV drip, then glanced down at her notes. "We called your emergency contacts, your parents. They said they would come." For a moment, relief spread through me. Of course, my parents would come. No matter the distance, no matter the differences, they would be here. But Dr. Alvarez's voice shifted, hesitating, her words careful. "They haven't arrived yet. It's been several hours." The relief drained from me in an instant, replaced by a hollow ache in my chest. My parents knew I had collapsed, that I was lying in a hospital bed surrounded by machines, and still, they hadn't shown up. Dr. Alvarez studied my expression as if she wanted to say more but chose not to. "Focus on resting for now. You're safe. We'll keep monitoring you." She left the room, the door closing quietly behind her. I stared at the silent phone on the bedside table, its blank screen reflecting my pale face. No calls, no messages. Just me. Alone. For the first time, the truth pressed in with unbearable clarity. If this was what it felt like to need my family, I would always be waiting. From the outside, my family looked flawless. Neighbors saw us as the kind of suburban portrait people put on Christmas cards. A neat house with white shutters, a manicured lawn, and 2 children who seemed destined for success. My father, Henry, was an accountant who wore crisp shirts and spoke in a measured tone that made people trust him instantly. My mother, Elaine, was the warm, social presence who ran bake sales and PTA meetings with a smile. And then there was my older brother, Michael, their pride and joy. Michael was the golden child. He excelled at everything he touched. Straight A's, varsity sports, leadership roles. If there was a spotlight, he knew exactly how to stand beneath it, and my parents beamed as if his glow came from them. I was 3 years younger, a shadow to his brilliance. Every accomplishment of mine was immediately stacked against his, as though my worth could only be measured by how it compared to his trail of trophies. I remember one evening when I brought home a drawing that had been chosen for the school art showcase. I was so proud, clutching the piece of paper with both hands as if it were a treasure. My mother looked at it briefly, then turned to Michael. "Your brother just got invited to an honors math competition," she said, her face lighting up. My father added, "See, Claire, That's the kind of thing you should focus on. Math, science, things that matter. My drawing was left on the counter until it curled at the edges, never even pinned to the fridge. That was how it always went. When I scored a B+ on a hard exam, my father frowned and asked why it wasn't an A like Michael always earned. When I made the volleyball team as a freshman, my mother smiled but immediately reminded me how Michael had been captain by the time he was a sophomore. It didn't matter that I worked hard, that I had my own victories. In their eyes, everything about me was always almost, nearly, but never quite enough. Family dinners followed the same pattern. My parents asked Michael about his classes, his goals, his next steps. He would talk about applying to Ivy League schools while my father nodded with approval and my mother refilled his plate. When the conversation turned to me, it was never about what I loved or achieved. It was always about what I lacked. If you just tried harder, Claire, you could be just like your brother. I would sit there silently, my appetite gone, wishing someone would ask me what I wanted instead of who I should try to become. Even holidays became reminders. On my 14th birthday, Michael announced he had been accepted into a summer science program at the university. The celebration immediately shifted to him. My cake barely touched. My presents forgotten as my parents discussed how proud they were. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had been born only to make him shine brighter by comparison. On the surface, we were a family everyone admired. Inside, I was invisible, a supporting character in someone else's perfect story. My parents had a golden son, and I was the daughter who existed only to remind them of how exceptional he was. I learned early on that no matter what I did, their eyes would never truly be on me. I grew used to disappearing in my own home. It wasn't a sudden thing, it crept in slowly like a shadow lengthening at dusk until it swallowed me whole. I can still recall the first time I realized I was forgettable to the people who were supposed to love me most. My 12th birthday. I had invited 2 friends over, hoping for balloons, maybe a cake with my name written on it in frosting. But that morning, my parents were too busy driving Michael to a soccer tournament out of town. They left a store-bought cake on the kitchen counter with a note taped to the box. "Happy birthday, Claire. We'll celebrate when we're back." They never did. I blew out candles with my friends in an empty house, pretending I didn't mind, pretending it wasn't a warning of what was to come. The years blurred into a rhythm of being second place. When I won third in the state debate finals, I rushed home hoping someone would be proud. I set the plaque on the kitchen table, heart pounding with anticipation. My father glanced at it once, then asked if I had heard that Michael had been named captain of the track team. "That's real leadership," he said, as if my hours of preparation and the courage it took to argue in front of strangers meant nothing at all. Even my school concerts and competitions became background noise in Michael's spotlight. During one spring recital, I played the piano solo I had practiced for months. When I looked out into the audience, my parents' seats were empty. Later I found out they had gone to watch Michael receive another award. They hugged him tight, beaming, while I rode the bus home alone with my sheet music crumpled in my lap. It wasn't that they didn't care if I succeeded, it was that my successes never counted as much. At my high school graduation, when my name was called and I crossed the stage, I searched for their faces in the crowd. They were there, but afterward, instead of congratulations, the talk was about Michael's internship at a prestigious law firm. "You'll have to work hard to catch up to him," my mother said, snapping a photo of him in his suit while I stood in my gown, holding a diploma that suddenly felt weightless. The cruelest part was how natural it became. I stopped expecting more. When holidays came around, I didn't wait for the traditions I used to love. If a gift showed up with my name on it, I was surprised. If my parents asked about my classes, I knew it was only to pivot the conversation back to Michael. My life became a quiet exercise in swallowing disappointment until I couldn't taste anything else. By the time I was 18, I had learned my place. The forgotten child, the one whose birthdays were overlooked, whose art and music were dismissed, whose milestones faded the moment my brother entered the room. It wasn't just neglect, it was erasure. I wasn't truly seen, not as Claire, not as someone who mattered on her own. I was a shadow trailing behind the golden boy, invisible even when I stood right in front of them. Leaving home for the city felt like opening a window after years of breathing stale air. I packed 2 suitcases, a box of books, and more determination than I knew what to do with. Chicago was loud, crowded, and alive in a way that my quiet suburban town never was. For the first time, I wasn't just Michael's little sister. I was Claire. I could decide who I wanted to be without the constant comparisons trailing behind me like a curse. At first, the freedom was dizzying. My tiny studio apartment had peeling paint and thin walls, but it was mine. I filled it with secondhand furniture and cheap prints from local artists, each piece chosen for no one's approval but my own. I walked to the corner cafe on weekends, sat with a latte and my laptop, and thought, this is my life, and no one can take it from me. Work became both anchor and escape. I started at a marketing firm as an assistant, staying late to learn the ropes, offering to take on projects no one else wanted. People began to notice. Within a year, I was managing small campaigns. Within 3, I was presenting to clients with budgets bigger than anything I'd imagined handling. My bosses praised my dedication, my coworkers leaned on me, and I felt seen in a way I never had at home. Every promotion, every new responsibility, felt like proof that I could stand on my own. And I wasn't alone. Slowly, I built a circle of friends, colleagues who shared late-night takeout with me in the office, neighbors who invited me to trivia nights, classmates from a pottery workshop who laughed with me over lopsided mugs. They weren't bound to me by blood, but they cared in small, consistent ways, asking how I was, showing up when I needed company, celebrating my victories no matter how small. It was the kind of support I had spent years craving. Meanwhile, my family became background noise. Phone calls reduced to birthdays and holidays, polite check-ins where the conversations were short and shallow. My mother would ask, "How's work?" And I would answer, only for her to sigh and say, "Michael just got promoted again." My father would tell me how proud he was of my brother for buying a house 10 minutes from them, for settling down the way a son should. My own apartment in the city, my independence, never seemed to register the same way. Michael thrived in his role as the golden child. He lived close to my parents, dropped by their house for dinners, posed for family photos that I was rarely included in anymore. On social media, I watched the posts pile up, celebrations of his milestones, snapshots of their gatherings. Sometimes I was tagged, as if to prove I was still part of the family. More often, I wasn't. And yet, the distance gave me peace. Without the constant reminders of who I wasn't, I could finally figure out who I was. I stopped waiting for their approval, stopped holding my breath for their recognition. I poured myself into work, into friendships, into building a life where I mattered, even if it wasn't to them. For the first time, invisibility didn't feel like punishment. It felt like freedom. It started small, almost easy to ignore. A headache here and there after a long day staring at spreadsheets. A tightness in my shoulders from too many hours hunched over a keyboard. I brushed it off like everyone does. Coffee, ibuprofen, maybe a hot shower if I had the time. Nothing I couldn't push through. But the headaches grew sharper, more insistent. They didn't wait until the end of the day anymore. They crept in during meetings, while I was mid-sentence presenting to clients while I was typing out strategies late at night. I told myself it was stress. Of course it was stress. That was practically the job description. In marketing, you were either sprinting toward a deadline or bracing yourself for the next one. I wore it like a badge of honor, the way my colleagues teased me for never leaving the office before 9, for answering emails at midnight. "Claire's unstoppable," they said, and I laughed along because being unstoppable felt like the only way to matter. Fatigue settled into my body like an unwelcome roommate. My mornings dragged, no amount of caffeine sharp enough to cut through the fog. I caught myself snapping at coworkers, zoning out during conversations, forgetting little things that once came easily. Still, I couldn't slow down. I had just been handed a major account, the kind of project that could define my career. If I pulled it off, I would finally step out of Michael's shadow once and for all. Not just the forgotten sister working quietly in the background. Claire Davis, Director of Strategy, the one clients requested by name. So I pushed harder. I logged 16-hour days, skipped meals, ignored the dizziness that sometimes swept over me when I stood too quickly. When Olivia, the junior copywriter who had quickly become my closest friend at work, frowned at the dark circles under my eyes, I waved her off. "I'll rest after the campaign launches," I promised. But there was always something else. Another meeting, another concept to polish, another slide to perfect. The warnings grew louder. Some nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, exhausted but unable to sleep. Other nights, I woke gasping, heart pounding as if I'd run a race in my dreams. My vision blurred if I stared too long at the screen, the letters swimming together until I blinked them back into place. I told myself I just needed new glasses. I scheduled an appointment, then canceled it when another deadline loomed. Deep down, a quiet fear whispered that something was wrong, but fear was dangerous. Fear meant pausing, admitting weakness, risking failure. And failure wasn't an option, not after years of being the invisible one. If I kept climbing, if I worked hard enough, long enough, maybe my family would finally see me. Maybe they would brag about me the way they bragged about Michael. Maybe for once, I would be the story worth telling. So I drowned the whispers in work, buried the symptoms under to-do lists and late-night emails. I told myself exhaustion was temporary, headaches were manageable, dizziness was nothing. Success would make it all worth it. If my body protested, I silenced it with determination. I couldn't stop now. Not when I was so close to proving I had always been enough. The morning of the meeting, I woke with a headache so sharp it felt like a blade lodged behind my eyes. I stood in the bathroom mirror, clutching the sink, whispering that I just had to get through today. Just this one meeting. This was the account I'd been living for, the project that could prove I wasn't just another name in the office, that I was someone worth recognizing. I doubled my pain medication, brushed concealer beneath my tired eyes, and slipped into my favorite suit. If I looked confident, maybe I could convince myself I was. The boardroom was already filling when I arrived. My slides glowed on the screen, my hands shaking as I arranged my notes. Olivia leaned in, her whisper tight with concern. "Claire, you look pale. Are you sure you can do this?" "I'm fine," I insisted, forcing a smile. "Nerves, that's all." The executives filed in, shaking hands with Richard, my boss, who flashed them his practiced charm. He introduced me as the lead on the campaign, and for a brief moment, pride flickered inside me. This was it. My chance. I launched into the presentation, words steady at first as I outlined the demographic data, the creative strategy, the bold new vision we had crafted. But 10 minutes in, the room tilted. The faces across the table blurred like wet paint running down canvas. My throat tightened, each word coming from further away, as though someone else were speaking. "Claire?" Olivia's voice cut through the fog, alarmed now. I gripped the edge of the table, desperate to steady myself. "As you can see from the analysis." My sentence fractured. A white-hot pain seared behind my right eye. The glass of water I reached for tipped over, spilling across my notes. My knees buckled. Gasps filled the room as my body gave out beneath me. Darkness swallowed everything. The next fragments came in flashes, sirens, the rush of a stretcher through hallways, someone asking my name, my age, but my mouth wouldn't move. Olivia's face hovered near, pale with fear, telling me I wasn't alone. Then nothing again. When I woke in the hospital, the machines were there, the sterile lights, the IV tethering me in place. A doctor explained I had collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration, that tests were underway to rule out more serious causes. His voice was calm but laced with caution. "We contacted your emergency contacts," he added. "Your parents." Something inside me unclenched at first. Of course they would come. But his expression faltered. "We've called twice. They said they'd try to make arrangements. No one has arrived." Hours passed. Olivia came by after work, sitting by my bed, scrolling on her phone to keep me company. She brought a tote bag with toiletries and pajamas from my apartment, her quiet presence anchoring me. The nurses checked my vitals, adjusted my medication, spoke to me with more kindness than I'd heard from my family in years. But my phone stayed silent. No calls, no messages, just absence. While doctors worried about what had caused my collapse, the emptiness where my family should have been was louder than any alarm. I lay there staring at the ceiling, realizing that even in crisis, I was invisible to the people who should have cared first. The second night in the hospital was the hardest. The pain in my head throbbed in waves and the IV pump clicked steadily beside me, its rhythm reminding me I was tethered to this place. Olivia had gone home to rest, promising to return in the morning. The nurses checked in periodically, offering soft encouragement, but the hours between their visits stretched into silence. I couldn't sleep. My body ached, my thoughts spun, and the loneliness pressed in like a weight. At last, I reached for my phone on the bedside table. I told myself I'd only check work emails, just enough to distract myself, nothing personal. But my finger betrayed me, opening social media before I could stop it. The familiar blue and white screen lit up, flooding me with notifications I hadn't looked at in days. And there it was, sitting at the top of my feed, a new post from my brother. The photo was bright, cheerful, and cruel in its timing. Michael sat at the head of a restaurant table, my parents on either side of him, all three of them grinning. Wine glasses sparkled in their hands, plates of pasta and bread crowding the table. My mother's head tilted toward him with adoration, my father's arm draped across the back of Michael's chair like he was king of the evening. The caption underneath cut like a blade. Finally, a drama-free family night. I stared at the words, reading them over and over until the letters blurred. Drama-free. That could only mean one thing: me. While I lay in a hospital bed with wires strapped to my chest and doctors running tests to find out why I'd collapsed, they were toasting their good fortune at not having me there. My absence wasn't just tolerated, it was celebrated. The comments rolled beneath the photo like a chorus of approval. "Beautiful family," wrote an aunt. "So glad you could all be together," added a neighbor. Heart emojis, clapping hands, little digital confetti raining down on their smiling faces. My name wasn't mentioned, my existence wasn't acknowledged. The family was complete without me. I felt my throat tighten, heat rising behind my eyes. I pressed the phone face down on the blanket, refusing to let the tears fall. They didn't deserve that, not anymore. But the ache was sharp, deeper than the pain in my head. A reminder that no matter how far I'd run or how hard I'd worked, the people who should have loved me unconditionally saw me as the problem, the blemish on their perfect photograph. I lay back against the thin pillow, the ceiling above me spinning slowly. My chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, each one carrying a mixture of anger and grief. I wanted to scream, to smash the phone against the wall, to demand they explain how they could dismiss me so easily. But all I could do was stare at the silent room, the machines humming, the phone still glowing faintly with their smiling faces. It was then I understood fully. They weren't coming. Not now, not ever. And in their eyes, that was a good thing. The morning after the post, I was woken by the sound of wheels squeaking across the tile. 2 doctors entered, their expressions too carefully neutral to be reassuring. One was Dr. Alvarez, the attending who had first spoken to me when I arrived, and beside her was a tall man with a serious gaze who introduced himself as Dr. Patel, a neurologist. My pulse quickened before they even spoke. "Claire," Dr. Alvarez began gently, "we have the results of your scans." She pulled up the image on a tablet, turning it toward me. My breath caught at the sight of the bright white mass lodged near the front of my skull. "You have what's called a meningioma," she explained, her voice steady, "a type of tumor that forms on the membranes around the brain. The good news is that most of these are benign, but the location and the pressure it's causing explain your fainting, the headaches, the blurred vision. It needs to be removed." For a second, her words didn't feel real. They floated around me like smoke. A tumor. Brain surgery. Words that belonged to someone else's nightmare. "Removed?" I repeated, my voice thin. "Yes," Dr. Patel said. "Surgery is necessary. We recommend proceeding soon. Within the week, the longer it remains, the greater the risk of permanent damage. My hands gripped the blanket until my knuckles whitened. Surgery, on my brain, and my parents. Do they know? Dr. Alvarez's face softened. We called them again this morning. Your father answered. He said they were busy but would try to make arrangements. No one has arrived yet. Something inside me broke then, not with the violence of glass shattering, but with the quiet finality of a door clicking shut. My family knew I was lying in a hospital bed, facing brain surgery, and still they couldn't be bothered to come. The loneliness pressed against my ribs until it hurt to breathe. The doctors gave me time, promising to return later with details. When the door closed, the silence was unbearable. I tried to picture my mother holding my hand, my father demanding answers from the surgeons, Michael cracking a joke to lighten the mood. But reality was stark. They weren't here. They weren't coming. That was when Olivia slipped into the room, carrying a tote bag filled with comforts from home, my favorite sweatshirt, a book from my nightstand, a charger for my phone. She set them on the table as if she'd always known what I needed. I figured you might want these, she said, her voice light, but her eyes searched mine. What did the doctors say? When I told her, she didn't flinch. She just reached for my hand and squeezed it. Then we'll get through this, she said firmly. You're not alone. Later, during the evening shift, Nurse Jennifer pulled up a chair. She'd seen the fear on my face and refused to let me sit in it alone. Family isn't always the ones you're born to, she said, adjusting my IV. Sometimes it's the ones who show up when you need them most. As I looked at Olivia's tote bag by my bed and felt Jennifer's steady presence beside me, I realized she was right. My blood family had abandoned me, but here, in this sterile hospital room, a different kind of family was forming, one that actually chose me. And maybe that was worth more than any last name ever could be. The days that followed blurred into a routine of tests, IV bags, and restless sleep. Yet, in that blur, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, Nurse Jennifer came in with a slip of paper in her hand. She set it gently on my tray. A few of our patients are going through things like yours, she said. Some are ahead of you, some just starting. If you feel up to it, they'd welcome a visitor. At first I hesitated. My instinct was to curl inward, to sit in my fear alone. But the silence of my room was suffocating, and the ache of being unwanted by my own family pressed too heavily on my chest. So I pulled on the robe Olivia had brought me and shuffled down the hall with Jennifer's encouragement echoing in my ears. The first room belonged to Martin, a retired teacher recovering from the very same surgery I was about to face. His head was bandaged, his voice raspy, but his eyes sparkled when he saw me. Don't be afraid, he said, as if he'd read my thoughts. You'll wake up, and you'll keep waking up. It's not the end. It's just another chapter. He told me about his grandchildren, about the books he was reading to pass the time, and when I left, my steps felt lighter. Next was Sophia, a young mother with eyes shadowed by chemotherapy. Her son's drawings covered the walls of her room, stick figures with messy crayon hearts. She smiled weakly as she told me her family was in Colombia, too far to be with her. But the nurses here? She said. They're like sisters now. And you'll see. Strangers can love you in ways family never does. She pressed one of her son's extra drawings into my hand before I left, as if to remind me that hope can be borrowed, even from someone else's child. Then there was Darius, a college student with an IV taped to his arm and earbuds dangling from his neck. His parents had cut him off when he came out, and now he faced leukemia alone. But not really alone, he said, nodding toward the nurses bustling outside. They know my name here. They look me in the eye. That's more than my family ever did. We talked about music, about the classes he missed, and when I laughed at one of his jokes, it was the first time I'd laughed since collapsing at work. Each room I entered chipped away at the heaviness inside me. Ruth, an elderly woman recovering from a stroke, held my hand and whispered that survival was an act of defiance. Jackson, a father of 3, told me he survived a car accident by reminding himself every day that pain was temporary, but love wasn't. When I returned to my room, exhausted but strangely buoyant, I realized something had shifted. The loneliness hadn't vanished, but it no longer defined me. In its place was the quiet knowledge that I wasn't the only one who had been let down, abandoned, or overlooked, and if these strangers could endure with courage, maybe I could too. For the first time, I believed I had more strength than I'd ever been given credit for. Seeds of confidence had been planted, not by my family, but by people who owed me nothing and still chose to care. I was sitting up in bed for the first time in days, carefully spooning soup from a plastic tray, when my phone lit up on the table beside me. For a moment, my heart leapt. Maybe finally my parents had decided to check on me, but when I swiped the screen, the truth was sharper. Missed calls, 6 from my father, 4 from my mother, and 2 from Michael. After silence, after being invisible during the scariest week of my life, they had found me. My stomach knotted, not with relief, but with suspicion. I answered the next call, my father's voice booming through before I could even say hello. "Claire, where have you been? We've been trying to reach you for days." No warmth, no concern, no, "Are you all right?" Just frustration, as though I'd failed him somehow. "I've been in the hospital," I said flatly. "Brain surgery." The line went quiet. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Well, yes, that's unfortunate, but listen, we really need to talk. Things are difficult right now. The firm's been hit hard and I could use your connections in marketing to get us some new contracts. Just a few introductions, you understand." I blinked at the ceiling, hardly believing what I was hearing. Not a word about my surgery, not a single ounce of worry. He had called because he wanted something. Before I could respond, my mother's voice chimed in, clearly on speakerphone. "Claire, honey, your father's under so much pressure, and I—" She let out a sigh, the kind that always made me feel like a burden. "I've racked up a few debts. Nothing major, but if you could just help us out financially for a little while, until we get back on our feet. You're doing so well in Chicago. We know you can handle it." I almost laughed, the sound bitter in my throat. They had ignored my illness, skipped my crisis, and now they were counting on me to rescue them from their own mistakes. Then Michael's voice cut in, smooth and confident as ever. "Look, Claire, this could be mutually beneficial. I'm finalizing a deal with a client who's interested in branching into media, and if you could leverage your agency contacts, it would help all of us. You scratch our backs, we scratch yours. Family sticks together, right?" Family. The word stung like an insult. Where had that togetherness been when I was lying unconscious, when doctors were delivering terrifying news? I gripped the phone tighter, feeling heat rise through me. "You've all known where I was," I said, my voice low but steady. "The hospital called you, and none of you came. Not one of you thought to check if I was okay. But now that you need money, connections, favors, you remember I exist?" An uncomfortable silence filled the line. My father muttered, "It's not like that." "It's exactly like that," I snapped. "I faced brain surgery alone. Strangers sat by my bed when my own family wouldn't. And you think I'm going to save you now? You've got the wrong daughter." I ended the call before any of them could answer, the echo of my own words ringing in the quiet room. For the first time, I didn't feel like the forgotten child. I felt like someone who finally had the power to choose, and I wasn't choosing them. Recovery gave me time, and time gave me clarity. I sat in my apartment weeks after the surgery, the scar beneath my hairline tender, my body weaker than I wanted it to be. Yet my mind, sharper than ever. I scrolled through my phone late one night, the images all still there, my hospital wristband, the screenshots of missed calls from doctors, their notes about family notified, no response. And of course, Michael's smug post, my parents smiling beside him, the caption that had cut me open deeper than any scalpel. Finally, a drama-free family night. I stared at the collection of proof. For years, I had swallowed my hurt in silence, letting them craft their perfect image while I lived in the shadows. But now, the silence felt like complicity. I thought of Jennifer telling me that family is who shows up, of Olivia taking a personal day to sit with me before surgery, and I thought of how my parents and brother had been more concerned with their own comfort than whether I lived or died. something inside me hardened. So I opened my social media and began typing. I paired a photo of Michael's drama-free post with one I had taken of my hospital wristband, the date of my surgery printed clearly across the tag. My caption was simple. While I was in brain surgery, my family was celebrating my absence. Doctors called. They never came. Sometimes blood doesn't make you family. I hesitated for only a moment before pressing share. The reaction was immediate. Comments poured in from friends, colleagues, extended relatives. Shock, outrage, disbelief. Old neighbors chimed in. I always thought they favored Michael, but this. Co-workers sent private messages of support. Olivia texted, "Good. Let the truth breathe." Within hours, the post spread. Screenshots bounced from group chat to group chat. By morning, it had gone viral within our community. My parents called, frantic. My father's voice was tight, angry. "Claire, take it down, you're humiliating us." My mother begged, "You don't understand the damage this could do to our reputation." Michael texted me paragraphs filled with half-formed excuses, then followed with threats. "You're ruining my career. Do you know what this will do to my clients?" I didn't reply. For once, I had the power, and I wasn't about to hand it back. I thought of their earlier calls, when they hadn't asked about my health, hadn't cared about my survival, only about money, connections, favors. Now they wanted me to save them from humiliation. But their crisis wasn't mine to fix. As the days passed, their perfect family image crumbled. My father's firm lost clients who no longer trusted his integrity. My mother's social circles whispered behind her back. Michael's reputation took the sharpest hit. His colleagues saw the screenshots, and the man who built his brand on being reliable, polished, and loyal was suddenly known as the brother who abandoned his sister during brain surgery. Invitations stopped, deals slipped away. I watched it unfold from a distance, not with bitterness, but with finality. This was their reckoning, one they had written themselves. For once, I wasn't the forgotten child. I was the one holding the mirror up to them, letting the world see what I had lived through. And when they begged for me to undo it, to help them recover, I did the only thing I had never done before. I said no. The seasons changed as I healed. Stitches faded to a scar hidden beneath my hair, the bandages replaced by strength slowly returning to my body. What never faded was the truth I had discovered in the hardest weeks of my life. I wasn't truly alone. I had a family, just not the one I was born into. Olivia became more than a coworker. She was there with takeout when cooking felt impossible, with laughter when the nights got too heavy, with loyalty so steady it left me wondering why I had ever begged for scraps of attention from people who couldn't give it. Nurse Jennifer remained a constant, texting to check on my recovery, meeting me for coffee between shifts, reminding me with every smile that compassion doesn't need to come with a shared last name. And the support group I had once stumbled into became a circle of strength. We swapped stories, victories, setbacks, and built a bond from honesty. They saw me, not as an afterthought, not as the shadow of a golden child, but as Claire. I found my sanctuary in a place I never expected. Before he passed, my grandfather left me his lake house, the small cabin on Crystal Lake, where I had once felt safe as a child. Returning there was like breathing air I'd been starved of for years. The porch creaked under my feet, the water shimmered gold at sunset, and the silence wasn't lonely. It was healing. I brought Olivia there first, then Jennifer, then the friends who had walked with me through recovery. We shared meals at the long wooden table, laughter echoing off the water, and for the first time, I realized I didn't have to wait for family traditions to be handed down. I could create my own. Work, too, gave me a new chapter. After the campaign I nearly collapsed over, my agency promoted me. Not because I was someone's sister, not because of family ties, but because I had earned it. My name on the door. My ideas leading the room. Proof that I had always been capable, even when my parents couldn't see it. Sometimes, late at night, I scrolled past the remnants of my family's polished facade. The smiles in their photos looked tighter now, the comments less adoring. They had erased me from their picture long ago, calling it peace, calling it drama-free. But standing on the dock at my grandfather's lake house, surrounded by people who had chosen to stand beside me, I finally understood. I didn't need their picture. I had painted my own, and mine was beautiful. To anyone listening who knows the sting of being overlooked, of waiting for love that never comes, hear me. Family isn't defined by blood. It's not the people who share your name, but the ones who show up when you collapse, who sit beside your hospital bed, who cheer for you simply because you're you. You deserve that kind of family. I found mine, and you can find yours too.